Hey everybody. It's been a little while, but I figured today's a good day to do an AMA. So I've got some pre-asked, pre-submitted questions that I'm going to answer, and if any of you have any questions for me, go ahead and drop them in the chat and I'll get to them as I can. Okay, so question number 1. As a beginner using Adobe Audition, what is the best way to remove an isolated background noise like a dog bark from a video's audio track? I'm not an Audition user, but my best advice is, unless you're getting paid very well for this type of work, it takes too much time and effort to try to remove a dog bark from an audio track. It just is. And I think that's probably one of those situations where, as an editor, we struggle with trying to deliver perfection to our clients and needing to understand where to draw that line. Because if it didn't bother the client enough to stop recording while the dog was barking or pause things, why should it matter to us so much that we put all of this time and effort into trying to remove something that really, in most cases, cannot be removed at all? It's just not worth the time and effort. I would ask, if this were me, I would go to the client and say, hey, we've got a barking dog in the background. We have two options here. We can leave it in, or you can pay me extra to go in and try to remove it as best as I can. But from experience, I'm going to tell you, we're not going to get very much return on that investment. So far, when I've provided the client with a choice like that, no one has opted to pay more to try to remove it. That tells me that, at least for my clients, they don't value that level of work as much as we think they do. Question number 2. I am starting a podcast and need to conduct remote interviews. What tools or platforms are best for capturing high quality audio to ensure a professional sound for my listeners? Okay, so there's a few things here. The first is, let's talk about the platforms for capturing the audio, because that's the number one thing we have to choose from. You have three primary choices. You can record locally. Well, you could do a double ender. These are remote interviews. We'll take that one out of the equation. So you have Zoom, and you have local recording platforms like Riverside, Squadcast, Zencaster, Boomcaster. What those tools do is they record my audio locally on my computer. My guest, if they're on Riverside, it's going to record their audio on their computer. And when we're done, or as we're recording, it's uploading those high quality recordings. Zoom, we're all familiar with Zoom. It doesn't do high quality audio. It doesn't do high quality video. If you want to see, I have a video that I've done comparing Zoom to Riverside. You can see and hear the difference in quality side by side. But the big thing with Zoom is everything is recorded over the internet. So you're going to get those dropouts and freezes and glitches, and you're not going to get that stuff with Riverside recordings because none of it is being recorded over the internet. But as far as a professional sound for your listeners, that's where these two ideas kind of separate, because you have the high quality audio, which is just a technical thing. It's how well your audio is recorded. But that professional sound, that comes down to a whole lot of other things that have nothing to do with the platform. Even though you see like Riverside and Boomcaster and all of them talking about studio quality sound, they can't give you studio quality sound. They can give you high quality audio recordings. And it really kind of irks me that they call it studio quality when that's not what it is. To get that professional sound, it's a mix of the microphone that you're using, it's the room you're recording in, it's your post-production, it's that entire package. So you can have let's just say the default podcasting setup of a Rodecaster Pro, Rodecaster Duo, and a Shure SM7B. That's not going to necessarily give you professional sound if you don't know how to use the mic, if you're not in a great sounding room, but it can get you a lot of the way there. If you put a little effort into controlling your acoustics, whether you're using acoustic tiles, kind of like you see behind me. Let me go back. Behind me, all of those tiles are acoustic panels. They help absorb all of the reverb and imperfections, so I can get away using a condenser mic, whereas a lot of podcasters, you can't. If you're just recording in a untreated space, you can't use a condenser mic. It's just not going to work because you're going to get all of that reverb that is a telltale sign, and then you have to put a lot more effort into cleaning up your audio. So that professional sound, it comes from a number of things. It's not any one specific thing. It just depends on your situation. Using high quality noise and reverb reduction tools can really help, since and that really kind of depends on what you're using for editing. If you're going to use Riverside or Descript for editing, you are really kind of limited in the options that are available to you. And I think I've got another question coming up that will delve into that a little bit more. But yeah, professional sound is a little more difficult to really get. It's not something you can really put your finger on. It's something that comes with a little bit of investment in equipment, some investment in time, learning how to use all of the tools available to you to get the best recordings that need the least amount of work. I guess this does tie into professional sound. My final uploads are consistently quieter than other online content, even though I record my audio just below the clipping point. How can I properly normalize my audio to meet standard loudness levels without causing distortion? And this is one I see quite a bit because volume and loudness are so difficult to really wrap our heads around because there are so many different places where volume and loudness are controlled. When we're recording, we have the gain on our preamp or our audio interface. That's the one place we're talking about right now when we're talking about recording levels, is your preamp gain. Once things are recorded and we bring it into whatever our editing program is, whether we're using a DAW, Riverside, Descript, that's the second place where we can set loudness. So there's different places we can do it. from the way this question is worded, this person is turning up the gain on their interface as loud as they can, as high as they can, before they clip. This is kind of like walking a tightrope without a net. And I apologize for my voice getting hoarse here and there. It is 8 o'clock in the morning here and my voice isn't fully hydrated. But what I was saying is, it's like walking a tightrope without a net. When you are recording just below the clipping point, if you laugh, if you get a little bit too loud, you're going to clip. That's not a good practice. You want to give yourself a good amount of headroom so that if you get a little bit louder, you're not going to clip. You can laugh and you're not going to clip. You don't have to go through your recording process stressing about or worrying about whether you're going to clip or not, because you've already got enough things on your mind. You don't need to be worrying about clipping every time you make a sound. So that's one thing. My advice would be to turn your gain down some and use your post-production to get your loudness. And nothing with audio is dead simple. How do I normalize my audio to meet standard loudness levels without causing distortion? There's a few elements, a few layers here. First, you're going to have to apply some compression, because if you don't compress your dynamics, when you apply that normalization, you're going to end up with more distortion, because to get the loudness that you want, you're going to be cutting off, limiting some of your louder parts, which could most likely cause some distortion. By compressing your audio, you're shaving off the louder parts so that they're not significantly louder than the quiet parts. It helps compress things. So instead of having really loud and really quiet parts, it brings them closer together so they're a little more consistent in level. That's going to allow you to make the overall dialogue louder without causing any distortion. Compression is a whole other topic that I don't have time to get into now. There's a lot of technical stuff, and it really depends on what you're using. I'm not sure what Riverside and Descript offer in terms of compression. I hope they offer something. If you're using a DAW, my go-to plugin is Sonable Smart Comp, because you play a little bit of your dialogue into it and it'll give you a good starting point for your compression. That's all I use on my client stuff, and I've never had to really go in and tweak it. It does a really good job. The next part of this question is, how do you normalize it? The first thing to understand is there are two types of normalization in most programs. You have peak normalization and you have loudness normalization. A lot of tutorials I've seen online, and I hope they've gotten better over the last few years, a lot of them would talk about applying peak normalization to your audio as soon as you bring it into your DAW and normalize to something like -1 or -2 dB. You don't want peak normalization. That's a really old school style of normalization, and it doesn't really help us for what we're trying to do. You want to use loudness normalization. And I know Adobe, I think, has a different name for it. I think Audacity calls it something else. So you may have to search the internet or ask AI, how do I apply loudness normalization in my DAW, my app, whatever you're using. That should tell you how to apply it. But the main thing is loudness normalization you set in LUFS. Peak normalization is done in dB. As far as what the standard loudness levels should be for a podcast, an audio-only podcast, you're shooting for -16 LUFS if you're stereo, or -19 LUFS if you're mono. If you're doing this for, and this is where I'm not quite sure with your question, quieter than other online content, if this is strictly for YouTube, I think I might go against the grain here, and YouTube's loudness standard is -14 LUFS, but trying to get dialogue that loud is unpleasant. It requires a lot of limiting, and I just find dialogue that's been mixed that loudly, it's not pleasant to listen to. Honestly, I find -16 LUFS a little too loud too. So I think most of my videos end up around -21, -20 LUFS. And nobody's complained that's too quiet. It seems to be on par with a lot of dialogue-driven videos. Music, that's going to be a whole other level, whole other game, where loudness is the ultimate goal for some reason. But for dialogue-driven content, usually you're fine anywhere between -16, -22, -23 LUFS, because people have volume knobs. That's what they're there for, to help adjust the levels as needed. Next question. I've received feedback that the S sounds in my podcast are too harsh and prominent. What is the recommended way to reduce this sibilance using editing software like Audacity or Riverside? As much as it pains me that people are putting Audacity and Riverside in the same sentence as editing software, this is where we're at. The truth is that Audacity is going to give you a lot more options, a lot more flexibility, just like any other DAW will, compared to Riverside. Riverside, Descript, editors like that, they're a really closed system. So the only things available to you are what the developers decide you need. And usually those aren't going to be as good as what you can get as a plugin that you can use within Audacity, or with just stuff that's built into Audacity natively. But so I don't use Riverside to edit. I don't know what's available in it. I doubt they have a de-esser, and that's what you're looking for. You need a de-esser. That's going to, it's built to reduce sibilance. In Audacity, they probably have a de-esser built in. I'm not an Audacity user, so I don't know if they do, and if they do, how good it is. But it should do a decent job. If you're looking for something a little bit better, there's all sorts of plugin de-essers out there. FabFilter Pro DS is really good. If you want something a little more automated, you could use Sonible's Smart DS. And I found the de-esser in, what is it called? It's Softtube The soft tube Lil Freak, it has a really good de-esser in it too. And I'm someone who has really harsh, prominent sibilance. And what I've been using, I had been using the Lil Freak for a long time, but I decided to try messing with Sonable Smart DS again, and I've been decently happy with the results. But the big thing with sibilance, especially if you're someone who has really harsh and prominent sibilance, our goal is to just take the edge off. We're never going to be able to completely remove it, because once you push de-essing too far, you start to sound like you have a lisp. And that's how you know you've pushed it too far. So that's something to be aware of once you start applying de-essing. So we've got a lot of like Riverside remote recording questions in here. My co-host records in a studio, while I often have to record remotely with a lower quality microphone, creating a noticeable difference in our audio. What are the most effective and ideally free ways to improve my audio track to better match the quality of the studio recording? There's a few things here. I'm not sure what you mean by a lower quality microphone, but for most cases, the first thing is if you're using a condenser, your work's cut out for you. Condenser mics they're super sensitive to sound, so if you're recording in a less than ideal space, a condenser mic is going to pick up all of the sonic imperfections in your space. So the reverb, any noises that are inside your room, like if you have a fan or HVAC running, or if you have a barking dog, like we talked about earlier, down the hall, or if you have landscapers outside, or kids playing outside, a condenser mic is going to hear all of that stuff. So if you're not already using a condenser mic, or if you're not already using a dynamic mic, that would be my first recommendation, is to switch to a cheap condenser. Or why do I keep saying condenser? Let me start that over. If you are currently using a condenser mic, my first recommendation is to switch that out to a dynamic mic. And if you're looking for a good, affordable dynamic mic that sounds really good and I feel compares fairly well to like an SM7B, check out the Fifine Case 688. I did a review to that. I did a review of that a few weeks ago, a couple months ago. I can't remember. Time just flies by at this point, but check that out. It's got some comparisons between the Fifine, the Shure MV7, and the SM7B, so you can kind of hear how it compares to the other mics. If you're already using a dynamic mic, the best free ways to improve your audio track are to treat your acoustics and make sure that you're positioning your mic correctly. Let me back out here. Okay, so with a microphone, dynamic or condenser, you want it close to your mouth. A dynamic mic needs to be closer to your mouth than a condenser. And how close it needs to be really depends on how loud your speaking voice is. Someone like me, I have a really quiet speaking voice, so I need a dynamic mic to be literally an inch from my mouth. Otherwise, I need to use a lot more gain than necessary. I just don't work well with dynamic mics. It took me a while to figure that out, but that's just the way my voice is. It's not loud, so I need that sensitivity that comes with a condenser. And even with a condenser mic, I've still got it about 3 inches from my mouth. Yeah, 2.5, 3 inches away. A dynamic, I'd have even closer. But the reason the mic distance to your mouth matters is as I move the mic away, you can hear I'm sound more distant. You start hearing more of the room, and you would hear a lot more reverb if I didn't have all of the acoustic panels. But we get the mic up to our mouth, we get more of that traditional up-close podcast sound. And that doesn't matter what type of mic you're using. That's the first step to getting really good sound and trying to minimize the impacts of poor acoustics. Once you've got the mic positioned well, you want to do something to treat your acoustics. Free stuff, you can use pillows, comforters, moving pads, moving blankets tend to work really well. I've seen people use like those rolling portable wardrobe racks and drape moving blankets over them to have portable acoustic panels. So soft furnishings, soft things that will absorb sound are going to help. Foam, like really thin foam, it's not going to do a whole lot. I see a lot of people get a giant box of like 1-inch thick foam and put it all over their space. And 1-inch foam doesn't really make much of a difference. It's going to absorb maybe a little bit of the highest frequencies, but it's going to leave a lot of the acoustic mess in place. You want to have at least 2-inch thick foam, and ideally you'd have various thicknesses between like 2 and 4 inches to absorb more of the frequencies more evenly. Let me go back to the question and see if we've got anything else I haven't answered. Okay, so we've talked about addressing it with your mic, addressing it in your space, and the last thing is you can address this in when you edit. I've done a ton of podcast editing. That's really weird. I've edited a number of episodes where you've got a host with good equipment and a good sounding space, and somebody's using like a laptop, or they're using a condenser in a typical home studio, home office. There's a number of plugins out there to help clean up the audio, to help reduce the reverb in the recording. I'm partial to Ascenti's DXRevive Pro. That's definitely not free, but it's the most effective plugin I've found. And I realize you didn't mention what you use to record, or what you use to edit. If you're using a DAW, you have all of the plugins available to you. If you're using Descript, your only option really is Descript Studio Sound. If you're using Riverside, your only option is their built-in Magic Audio. If you're using, I can't think of others that offer that kind of audio production. But if you're using a DAW, like I said, Ascenti's DXRevive Pro is what I use for client work. I found it works on the vast majority of audio I work with these days. Other options are Supertone Clear. It does a better job of noise reduction than DXRevive Pro, but it doesn't do quite as good of a job on reverb reduction, and overall, it depends on what kind of quality we're dealing with, because if you just need to take a little bit of the reverb off and you're getting pretty clean recordings, Supertone Clear can do the job. If you're dealing with more variable audio, where like I would as a podcast editor, where I get audio quality of all types from clients, something like DXRevive Pro is going to offer more flexibility. Trying to think what else there is out there that I've found to do pretty well. I mean, those are really the two that I recommend to most people. I do have a video that I did probably a couple years ago where I shoot out DXRevive Pro, Cedar Audio, VoiceX, Supertone Clear, Auphonic, Adobe Studios, whatever they call it, Voice Enhance, which I haven't found to be very good, but I have not tested it out in probably a year. The last time I tested it, it works sometimes on really bad audio, but can kind of trash good audio. It's kind of weird. I don't really recommend that. And there were a few other tools. I think I ended up trying 9 different tools in that video. And you can hear how it compares, how each one does on various recording types. Thank you, Jason. I don't know how long I've been muted. I'm not even sure why I was muted, but oh well, I'm back. So, I've received, let's start all over. I've received offers from podcast promotion services on LinkedIn that guarantee a specific number of monthly downloads, subscribers, and 5-star reviews. Are these types of services legitimate, and do they result in authentic audience growth? And the thing is, if you're getting these types of emails or DMs, just ask yourself, if they were this good at doing what they say they do, why are they DMing you? If they're that good, they're going to be expensive and working with people who are going to pay them fortunes to get tons of 5-star reviews and thousands of subscribers. Anybody who promises that, they're either really good at what they do and they're going to be charging a fortune and they're going to have waiting lists. They're not going to be DMing you. The other type of person that makes those types of promises are people who are going to be using bots to buy you, to get you these fake numbers. So if somebody emails you saying, hey, I can get you these types of stats, just ignore it because it's a scam. So we've got some comments here. Let's see. Jason, for sure, it trashes the audio, the good audio on Auphonic. I actually found Auphonic to be surprisingly good on the audio. I'm not sure if you were talking about the Adobe one, but yeah, that's the thing with any kind of audio or like noise and reverb reduction stuff. I haven't found one that works great on all audio. So that's why I have so many options available to me, because what works on one piece of audio on one recording might not work on the other. Did you test Auphonic Desktop or Auphonic Online in that video? I used the online version because I didn't know there was a desktop version of Auphonic, and this was also done before they added the jingle to the free version. The thing with Auphonic is, even though I was really surprised by how well it did, I just can't stomach paying for usage the way that Auphonic charges. I can't stomach paying a subscription when I can get similar or better results using a plugin that I pay once and can use forever. But yeah, I'll have to check into Auphonic Desktop to see if it's available. Maybe it's a PC thing. I really have not been made aware if there is a Mac version. So I'll have to look into that. And then Jason was telling me that I was muted for about 60 seconds, so not a whole lot of, not a huge loss. This looks like the last question I have, so if any of you watching out there have any other questions, please drop them in the chat. But this question is, I'm using a Heil PR31BW mic with a Focusrite Scarlett Solo, and the recorded volume for voiceover is far too quiet, even with the input gain turned all the way up. Would a Cloudlifter resolve this issue, or are there better alternatives for increasing the mic's volume? And this ties in with one of the earlier questions that we had about input gain and making things louder. I think the first thing to ask is, how are we defining that the gain is too quiet? Because unless you are live streaming is the only place where your volume in real time matters, because you want people to be able to hear you. But if we're recording anything that's going to be edited down the line, we want to record for kind of optimum gain level to give us the most headroom, but also loud enough that we're not dealing with noise floor issues. That's one of the benefits of recording 24-bit audio, and one of the downsides about browser-based recording systems that use 16-bit. With 16-bit, you have a lot less wiggle room. That's kind of a little bit off topic, but when it comes to gain, if you're having to crank the gain all the way up, you're generally introducing noise. Using a Focusrite Scarlett, you're definitely introducing noise if you're cranking it all the way up. A Cloudlifter will help you get more gain out of the mic, so you can turn the gain down on the solo. But my question would be, is it needed at all? If you're using something like an SM7B that does need a ton of gain, and you're using it with the solo, yeah, you probably want an inline mic booster. Cloudlifter is one of them. It's more expensive. I prefer the little plug-in preamps. FetHead makes one. There's SE Electronics, I think, makes Dynamite, but they just plug right into the mic, and then you plug the cable in, and they tend to be about $100 compared to whatever a Cloudlifter goes for these days, $200. And you don't need, it's not a box, you don't need an extra cable. You just plug the booster into the mic, plug the cable into the mic, and you're good to go. But for most mics, you probably don't need a Cloudlifter. The RE20, the SM7B, there might be a couple of others. I'm not familiar with the Heil PR31. I know my sister has a PR30. She never needed a Cloudlifter with that. I did a review with that mic, and I didn't need one. So I would think maybe this is more a matter of post-production gain leveling, gain staging. Just boost the level when you edit. That's how I tend to do things, because like I mentioned earlier, I have a quiet voice, so I'm going to have to add a ton of gain regardless. When you do it in post, it's going to be cleaner than if you're maxing out your gain on the solo. Okay, so a follow-up. Sorry, I should have said the desktop version, I think, has been superseded by the online version, no longer available, not compatible with current Mac for sure. So that would explain things. Yeah, I used the online version, and I don't know if it's the same algorithms that were available in the desktop. I would think that I would hope that they're continually improving their algorithms. So chances are, unless they're still updating the desktop version, chances are the results online are going to be a little bit better than what the desktop version offered. That's one of the things I've really liked about DXRevive, or DXRevive Pro, is they've put out a number of updated algorithms since they released it, and that's not something I've seen any other noise reduction plugin do. Supertone Clear, the only updates they offer are like bug fixes. They haven't updated their algorithm. The waves stuff, the DX Clarity, denoise, and de-reverb, whatever they're called, I'm not aware of them offering any upgrades to the algorithm. We know Isotope RX, they only update things maybe once every release, and that just depends on whether they've made any updates to the particular module you are using. Like the newest version in, I think, RX12, it's better than Dialog Isolate was in previous versions, but it requires a ton of compute resources, and it's just not that well optimized. So yeah, that's why I do the shootouts that I do, so people can hear how each one compares, because there are so many tools out there. I think I did 9 of them in that shootout, and I could have probably added another 5 of them. And there's probably, I know I've seen Brush Fry, something like that I've seen recommended. That's on my list to test out. Yeah, there's just so many of them. And if anybody has any last questions, now's the time. Otherwise, I'll wrap up and call it good. So I'll give a few minutes. I'll just kind of ramble along, see if we have any other comments. Thank you, Jason. Yep, scenes always. This is my biggest frustration with Ecamm. When I change scenes, some scenes, for whatever reason, automatically mute me. So thank you, Jason and Business Growth Ready, for letting me know that. So what I was saying is, it's been a busy time for me. We're in the middle of rebranding our business. We're going from Tansiaster to Branded Business Remix, where we're focusing more on, we're going to have to focus more on business ops, on branding, on high value storytelling, on AI automation. We're moving away from podcast production as a primary service, just because AI and places like Upwork and Fiverr are really impacting things. Jason, yes, I do need a note. It's been an ongoing frustration, and the one that really trips me up is when I switch scenes where I'm not muted and the new scene mutes me. Usually I have other people on the streams with me that help me, but I do appreciate you two, because even if I was wearing headphones, it wouldn't help because I still hear myself whether I'm muted or not. But with the AI stuff, we've spent a lot of time over the last year really looking at things. And even over the last few months, I've talked to probably 4 or 5 people about podcast production jobs or podcast related jobs, and without fail, podcasters kind of across the board aren't seeing the value in hiring high-end editors the way they did a few years ago. I talked to one guy about a consulting opportunity, and he told me he uses a $12 an hour editor from overseas. I can't compete with that. And there's no point in me trying to find clients who aren't going to be able to afford me. So I'm having to look at the areas where I can apply my skills, my expertise, or new things I can learn to be able to offer services that people do value, that will allow me to remain self-employed. Business Growth Ready said, that's interesting. The other day I was trying to use a third-party audio monitor on the Mac to monitor Ecamm's virtual mic out so I could see the audio if it dropped. I could probably do that. The big problem is I have such a convoluted audio setup, because I've got my Apollo, which is connected to my monitors, and one of my monitors died this week. That's completely beside the point, but my audio equipment, my studio equipment's been dying on me for the last 3 years. 2 monitors, one died 3 years ago, the other one died this week, yesterday. My Apollo X8 died a couple of months ago, but I've got everything's repaired, or everything's been repaired except for my monitor. But I've got my X8, that's my main monitoring setup. But for live streams, I use the Mackie DLZ for stuff, just because it makes things a whole lot simpler for me. But trying to monitor, I think, might be a little cumbersome, because I have to use so many custom routings for everything. I really wish there was an easy way to set up like a single toggle to monitor the feed going out to the stream and go back to hearing myself and the guests. That is one of the things Elgato did really well with their I can't think of the name of their software that they use for their interfaces. It offers, you've got right there in the software, an input monitor and a stream monitor. So it's really easy to switch back and forth. Only problem is you're dealing with that latency. And I don't think, actually thinking about that, that wouldn't help me with the scene issue, because I'd have to be listening to the latency side of the stream. Yeah, because the audio would have to come after the mute. I'm just thinking out. I'm I'm just thinking out loud here. And yes, Wavelength was the one that I was talking about. Thank you, Business Growth Ready. So yeah, streaming is a whole other world with a whole new set of frustrations to deal with, and I'll have to actually do some research, set some time aside to figure out how Ecamm assigns mute levels to different scenes so that I can go through and set them up so nothing's muted, because I just want to control muting on my own. I don't want any scene muted because it causes these types of problems. Thank you, Jason and Business Growth Ready, for your help, letting me know when I'm muted, for participating, for asking questions, because without you, I'm just talking to a camera into the great dark void, and I don't know if it's helpful. It's always good to have some people to interact with, and that's why I really enjoy having Matthew on the streams, because we can bounce things off each other, and I think it gives a much better live stream experience for everybody who watches and participates. But thank you for watching, thank you for participating, and I'll talk to you all next time.